I'd been out of high school, graduated about a year. I mean, you know, I was working, but college wasn't in my future at that point, and just kind of needed some direction, wanted to do something different, and so I joined. When I joined in '75, you joined for 3 years as a female. You had to have a high school education. Men did not. They didn't even have to have a GED back then. But a woman had to be a high school graduate, and her enlistment was for 3 years. Everyone I talked to that was going to be signal was going to Fort Gordon, Georgia, except for me. And I was supposed to go to Fort Dix, New Jersey. So I kept whining, if you will, to the drill sergeant. Everybody else is going to Fort Gordon that signal. Why, you know, I'm not. And so they finally sent me to trainee personnel. So I went to trainee personnel, and I told them, look, I'm going to be a radio operator, and everybody that I talk to that I'm going to basic training with says they're going to Fort Gordon if they have a signal military occupational specialty. So they, now you think this is 1976, they got their little book out, looked up the course. Oh no, you're going to Fort Dix. When I got to Fort Dix and finally called and got someone to pick us up and for us to report, the first thing they did is look at my orders and looked at me and said, what are you doing here? The last radio operator course started 3 weeks ago, and there's not another one starting for, it was like 10 weeks, and that's going to be at Fort Gordon, Georgia. I said, well, I tried to tell somebody, but they wouldn't listen. So I was stuck at Fort Dix, which, that's one of the worst posts I've been to. After the long weekend, then they had to contact my unit here in the state. And so I ended up reclassifying to become a radio teletype operator, and went from a 5-week advanced individual training to a 10-week advanced individual training. When I got back, I was ready to go to annual training because I needed paycheck. And they put me driving a vehicle, first out, as soon as we got back in a convoy. Didn't tell me we were going to stop at a rest area. It was like 8 miles out of town. Well, the convoy stopped and I went on. And I kept thinking, where is this convoy? Where is this convoy? Of course, I never caught them because they were behind me. Of course, they were on that rest area and they saw me go by. So they had radioed ahead. The battalion commander and the sergeant major were at the gate when I got to Fort Chaffee. That commander his nickname was Mule Presley. He was Lieutenant Colonel. And Sergeant Major Ozzie Walford. And of course, you know, it was June. It was hot. I had my hat off. You know, all those good things that young troops do. And pulled into that gate. Sergeant Major says, Private, what are you doing? Sergeant Major, I'm looking for the convoy. He said, well, you run off and left. I said, oh, okay, well, nobody told me they were going to stop. Of course, you know, a lot of things have changed since back then. And he said, soldier, get your vehicle and get to the motor pool. I said, yes, Sergeant Major. Where's the motor pool? Of course, you know, you can just say, oh my gosh. You know this, right? So he told me where the motor pool was, and I went on to the motor pool. So that was my first initiation into annual training at a convoy. But, you know, the sergeant major didn't just chew me out, you know, upside one side and down the other. You know, he was decent to me. And it did two things. Number one, it made me figure out real quick that I wasn't going to be put in a position that I didn't know what was going on again. And that probably affected my entire career, really. And number two, hey, I might want to be a sergeant major someday. I will never forget to this day. He got to me and he had that medal and he just stopped. Like, where am I going to pin it? You know, it was pretty unique at that point in the Arkansas National Guard. Because, I don't know if I said this earlier, but the first female didn't get in the Arkansas National Guard until 1973. And I joined in 75. But you can just tell when you read somebody's thoughts, and you could just see him thinking, oh, I got to pin this award on this female soldier. Well, we still had female fatigues then. And, of course, we had our field jacket on, and it didn't have chest pockets like the male field jackets did. It just had flaps. And I truly remember him very gingerly taking the very edge of that flap and raising it up so he could pin that award on me. The non-commissioned officer education system was starting up in both the Army and the Army National Guard. And so they were establishing a non-commissioned officer academy in the Arkansas National Guard at the Arkansas Military Academy. And I even remember who evaluated me. Sergeant Major Bill Nichols was my evaluator. He was an instructor at the Professional Education Center. But I was in a private first class and did a training class to be an instructor for the NCO Academy. And I was selected. There were 12 of us on the original staff of the NCO Academy. And there were 2 women in that group. One was administration. That was Barbara Stevens. She was a specialist then. And I think I got promoted right before I got transferred to specialist. And there was me as an instructor. I was a by-the-book soldier. And I truly believe that has led to whatever successes I've had. Because it's hard for anybody to argue with the standards when they're established. And the book, if you will. Whatever book it is that you're working out of, but still, it's kind of hard to argue with that. So that's probably one of the things I'm known for. I was an instructor for the senior non-commissioned officer course, and it was about one of the first courses of the senior non-commissioned officer course that we had taught. And of course there were a lot of old NCOs in that class who had been around a long, long time. And here's a junior sergeant first class and woman on top of that. A lot of them were maintenance, and of course they didn't like to go by the book necessarily. And so, you know, there was some contentious times from time to time during that course. But the reason I don't hold any grudges for anything along the way, because that's why I am who I am. But the reason I'm telling you this story is at the end, at graduation, they made a presentation to me. And a couple of the guys that worked in the canvas shop at the combined support maintenance shop went down and made a pair of breeches out of naga hide. And they presented them to me and dubbed me that day as Iron Breeches. And that stuck. And those that have known me for a long time, something said about Iron Breeches, they know exactly who you're referring to. They developed the first sergeant position, and then, of course, that's a lateral appointment, but they put me in that position. Of course, there was a lot of talk that that position was made specifically for me. Well, it wasn't. I can assure you it wasn't, because I left 6 months later. But I left on my own accord. And the reason I did is I got a call from, it's actually Colonel Doug House, retired. He was Captain Doug House at the time. They were starting a new company, and it was the 119th Personnel Services Company. And he called me and asked me if I would come and be his first sergeant for that company. Well, when he called me the first time, I told him no. And they were having a kind of a hard time filling the position. And so he called me, it was probably a good 3-4 months later, and asked me again. And I got to thinking about it. It's not often you get offered a position a second time. And so, after thinking about it, I decided, okay, it's time to go. I conducted the first non-commissioned officer induction ceremony in the Arkansas National Guard. And we did that on our way to Fort Hood. We did it in Sulphur Springs, Texas, in the park. But we had a battalion formation. You know, all of them cited the non-commissioned officer creed. I gave them all a copy of the non-commissioned officer creed and signed it and had them sign it. And that was just part of that, trying to you know, improve their professionalism and their pride, and for them to realize the capabilities they actually had. But I was called to the State Sergeant Major's office. I said, well, Sergeant Major, you ready to go home and be a housewife? Well, you probably could have took and went, and steam would have rolled. I said, as a matter of fact, Sergeant Major, I am not. I kept my cool. I did return to my office, and I did tell my boss, who was the human resource officer at the time, what had happened. And I guess the human resource officer worked for the deputy adjutant general, and I guess he probably told him, but anyway, I think the sergeant major got in trouble. I mean, I never filed a complaint or whatever. I never did that my entire career. I probably could have. That wasn't the deal. While I was at 212, I was the non-commissioned officer in charge of the 1993 inaugural task force that marched in the presidential parade in Washington, D.C. for President Bill Clinton. That caused some havoc when I was selected for that position. But couldn't nobody really compete, quite honestly, because of all the marching and all that I did at the academy and uniform. I mean, all those things came with the academy. Colonel Bill Wofford was the task force commander. It was pretty awesome time too. We did an inspection. Of course, our uniforms weren't the best in the world, especially best fitted in the world necessarily. And so we had inspections and trying to get soldiers' appearance up. And we, I think it was like one soldier from every company in the state. So there was no like unit integrity, except the band went also, the 106th Army Band went. And so I was, checking soldiers for uniform fit and all those things. And I remember us doing this one inspection. And I was down to devices on ribbons and, very specific. And I remember it was Lieutenant Colonel Kim Kimmy complained to Colonel Bill Wofford, "Don't you think she's being kind of picky?" Colonel Wofford said, "Leave her alone. She's doing what she's supposed to be doing." Well, the reason I say that is because in that parade we marched behind the 3rd Guard. Yes. So, needless to say, nobody complained anymore about Sergeant Major being too hard on what their uniform was right. Oh my goodness. Major General Don Morrow selected me as State Command Sergeant Major. Yes, it's the first female State Command Sergeant Major in Arkansas, the only one to date. Quite honestly, I think I was the 3rd in the nation, State Command Sergeant Major, maybe the 4th. The first female Command Sergeant Major that was promoted in the Guard was, I think she was from Vermont. But I don't think she was the State Command Sergeant Major. The first State Command Sergeant Major, I think, was actually in Colorado. And I sat on the Command Sergeant Major Selection Board at National Guard Bureau that selected her for Command Sergeant Major. I was already a Command Sergeant Major. The second one was Karen Craig from Arizona, and then myself. So when we did conferences, with the State Command Sergeant Majors nationwide, there was Karen and I for a long time. It was just the two of us, and we got along great, and so it was nice to have another female Command Sergeant Major, quite honestly, to talk to and to compare notes to, and just there just wasn't anybody around to really share your thoughts with and know if you were on the right track or if you were leaning the wrong way or just exactly what. So, it was good that she was there, and I still talk to her on occasion today. Our 39th Infantry Brigade got their mobilization notification, and they were due to mobilize in October. Well, you're talking over 3,000 soldiers. It was pretty traumatic because they'd had a battalion mobilized for Egypt but they had never been mobilized as a brigade. And let me tell you, that's pretty taxing on a state to get soldiers ready. But that was a pretty hard time, because in April of 2004, we had our first killed in action casualties. There had not been any casualties, killed in action casualties in the Arkansas National Guard since Korea. So needless to say, there was no one around that had ever been through that experience. That's probably the hardest thing I did as the state command sergeant major, was working. It was the hardest thing emotionally. It was the most proudest, most honorable thing probably that I feel like I've done, is to work with those families, is to present those families with awards when those soldiers were laid to rest. Major General Mora and I were fortunate. We got to go to Iraq. We went to Iraq in 2004 and visited our soldiers. It was, it was kind of an interesting trip. We landed at the airfield. Of course, you go into Kuwait and then you go into Iraq. But we landed at the airfield. We had aviation people there as well. There were other units that mobilized after the 39th got their notification, but we mobilized almost 12,000 soldiers in that process. And the strength of the Guard, the Arkansas Guard, is about 8,000. So you can see units went multiple times, but we got to visit, and we landed at the airfield. We're fixing to pull up and visit our aviation units there at the airfield. First thing, sirens go off, We're shooting at the airfield. So, just everybody's got their flak vest on and all their equipment, and you continue to do business. You just don't have any aircraft taking off or landing after the sirens go off until they get it on clear. And so we did that. Then we went on and we actually went to the Green Zone. 1st Battalion was down there, and so we went and visited, got to visit those soldiers, of course, upper armored Humvee, locked and loaded and all those things. Of course, I didn't have to worry. General Morrow was with us, and they're going to make sure nothing happens to him. But it was all right. I didn't mind at all, because it was awesome to see those soldiers. And they were so appreciative of us coming. So appreciative. It was just like they couldn't believe we came to see them. It was like, you're part of home. And one of the things that I'm truly, truly glad that I had something to do with, and that was to start our military funeral honors program. With the combat casualties, it identified a true need. And so they had first, some of the states had started their military funeral honors program. And so I went to General Morrow and asked him to, you had to request it first. And so I asked him to sign the letter to start the program. And he signed the letter for me. And we sent it to National Guard Bureau, and then started the work in developing our military funeral honors program. I pretty much oversaw our military funeral honors program until right before I retired. I supervised the the full-time technician that worked there, and oversaw the funds and the training and those things. It was my baby, I guess, if you would say so. But I did it because there was truly a need. And the soldiers that volunteered for that program were awesome. They just give so much to do that service. And of course, you know, we had to develop the program. We had to get uniforms because did it in dress blues. National Guard Bureau hired a contractor who had been out of the 3rd Guard in D.C. And so, you know, he knew all the uniform ins and outs, and so, I mean, there was just a lot of work that went to developing the program. And then where we put them to work, you know, phones, and they got moved around 2 or 3 times, and I finally went to General Halton, who was the Deputy Adjutant General, and we come up with a plan, and we built a building specifically for military funeral honors. And it's got steam irons and presses, and I mean, it is developed with, that building is built with that mission in mind. I got involved with the Command Sergeant Major Advisory Council. I just felt it was important because they tried to address, you know, issues that were common nationwide, and I felt it was important to be involved in that, to address that. So I got involved with that program. There were, of course, basically Karen Craig and I, and she was involved too, and served as an alternate for our area rep, served as a rep for our area, became the vice president of the council, and then became the president of the Command Sergeant Major Advisory Council. No other female has done that. Hopefully there'll be another one someday. I chose to retire full-time and from the State Command Sergeant Major position, and that was when the Joint Force Headquarters was going through some transition, and they had actually developed what they called a senior enlisted leader position. And so after I retired full-time as the State Command Sergeant Major, well, General Wofford asked me to stay on as a traditional soldier in the senior enlisted leader position, and that was considered a joint billet. I couldn't really turn him down, quite honestly. And there, you know, I'd known General Wofford for a long time, but way back when I started this interview, if you recall, I talked about a Command Sergeant Major Ozzie Wofford. That was Major General Wofford's dad. So my first Command Sergeant Major was my last commander's dad. And so I did stay on and serve as the senior enlisted leader from November 2011 until I actually fully retired in July 2014. It's kind of a unique position. I was first one to be in that position, so trying to fledge out what that position should be and should do. My husband served. We met through the Guard, and it was challenging because he was young officer, I was young NCO. Of course, that was, that wasn't a problem back then. That wasn't an issue. But we were never in the same unit, so it didn't matter anyway. But he had put our son on his knee and had the guard drill because his parents lived in Northwest Arkansas, because he was in 142nd and I'd go to the academy. So yes, it could be very challenging at some time. But he retired in 91, which was, right before I made command sergeant major. And there's never been any greater supporter of me than him. And if it weren't for his support, I wouldn't have made it, because, quite honestly, a lot of females didn't stay because they didn't have that support from their spouse. I'm very proud to have served. I'm very fortunate to have been as successful as I have been. I think I have been fairly successful. I met my goals that I had set for me along the way. I have the Guard to thank for who I am, and quite honestly for what me and my family have, because they have been my lifetime. I spent 39 years, basically my whole adult life. So I'm very thankful for that. The way I tried to do things my entire career. And that was to do things to take care of the mission and to do things to take care of soldiers. And to do it by the book. Sometimes those things were in conflict. Sometimes those decisions weren't the easiest decisions, but you still had to make them what was right. And that's what I always tried to do. But I never tried to focus on, well, I did this, well, I did that, or tell the general, I did this, or I didn't do business that way. And a lot of things I did and just did it in stride and went on. And never thought about it. I don't think you can have a greater calling. You are a part of something greater than you will ever be by yourself. You will come to be best friends with people that you would never have met otherwise. And it's not about you when you join the military. It's about us and the team. And there's no greater calling.